Thank you for choosing Pilbert Co. for your listening needs. Please enjoy this edition of Reality Check, Part 1.
A spacious green quad spread out before Dev as he made his way to the Human Resources office, the largest one he'd ever seen. The memory of his graduation still rang fresh from 2 years ago, and he remained hopeful that he might regain some of that original spirit. His artistic collaborator and friend had finally found an opportunity for someone like him in the exact same department. He couldn't be happier. No one would know his skill set like Remy. Since completing their capstone project, the two were always exploring new possibilities for their next collaboration. Their last result was a sculpture from recycled concrete and titanium that even the art department couldn't help but notice. Physical sculpture had taken a back seat in the art world for some time now, and they both enjoyed presenting their little revival. It was currently displayed in the atrium of the Student Art Gallery for at least the next 10 years. The past 2 years had provided a valuable, if frustrating, time for Dev. He had been warned about the timeless, starving artist trope and refused to buy it. Unfortunately, after taking the swan dive, he hit concrete. If he wanted to have any quality of life on his planet, he'd have to fund through more conventional means. After all, he figured, his creativity might just flourish under the constraints of a highly structured company, such as Pilbert. If it wasn't ideal, working near Remy was bound to generate something interesting between them. One worth slaving in an office for, he begrudgingly told himself. The hour-long trip on the Levi train was swift and smooth, arriving at the exact time it was slated to, making quick work of the nearly 500-mile journey. He wasn't quite sure why Pilbert seemed to choose more remote areas for construction, but it probably had to do with the sheer size. Cutting through the grass were smooth concrete sidewalks, a massive green patchwork of sorts. It was something between a grid and a spider web, a sprawling network. It seemed chaotic, but still went precisely where it needed to. Each step was microscopic compared to the open space around him, his backpack digging into his shoulders. The whole space struck him as too large, and there didn't seem enough using the paths to justify it. The biggest help to him so far had been the signs that were posted at nearly every intersection. Quite excessive, but helpful. He felt like a giant crossing the streets of old Manhattan, towering over each of the stoplights, casually observing them change colors with the occasional bush serving as a building. All the signs were spotless and engraved in the same font and color palette. Minimal, but it still worked. He was being overly critical, he thought. The principles of visual design had been instilled for a few years, and it was hard not to be elitist about it. Most people here didn't have such a background and could care less about such frivolities. This was an office and not a museum. After zigzagging around a dozen buildings that were practically identical, he finally arrived at one with a familiar sign reading Human Resources Building, Pilbert Inc. The company name was colored in a shade of periwinkle, in contrast to all the other ones he had read. This must be the place. He grinned and stepped through the doors. He was immediately overcome by the throng of workers. It was almost too large to be comfortable with an abnormal amount of people. They went back and forth over the surface of the carpet, some headed left, others right, and many both, as they fluidly weaved through each other. They all hurried down identical hallways that stretched longer than he anticipated. The building was booming with activity, in contrast to the concrete paucity outside. This was only what to expect from the largest company in the galaxy, he supposed. The headquarters took up almost an entire planet. In his case, he had no existing family members who worked for Pilbert, quite unusual for this day and age. Perhaps that was why they were so quick to call him back after his interview. Regardless, he had convinced himself that he could adapt quickly to whatever this job put to him. He always considered it a strength of his. He surveyed his surroundings to find a hanging sign to his left. Human Resources Identification Room. Following its lead, he bobbed in and out of the crowds before he found a train of people heading in the same direction. They all wore the typical business attire, but some wore pants that seemed almost too straight for their feet, creased down the middle. These must have been the khakis the company had become known for. The building itself was an absolute homage to historical architecture. While most offices of the day followed the current trends, Pilbert was renowned for its dedication to the functional style of a long-and-gone age. He bathed in the notoriously beige walls and bright tubular lights. It was a style executed so thoroughly that he simply couldn't formulate an opinion yet. Strange and unnecessary railings lined the walls of almost every path one could appear to take. And he was still only halfway down the corridor. He sighed. It was going to be difficult to arrive here on time if he had to pace through too many of these. Working in a living monument to the past was a singular experience, though. He leveraged. A little over a minute later, the sign for the HR identification room came into focus above a large set of 2 swinging wooden doors. They too had a curious railing placed across them that was meant to be pushed to open them. Dev did so, and was relieved to be dispensed into a less crowded space with assortment of desks along its edges. Behind the desks, lining the walls, was what looked like a blue cloth barrier, about 10 feet tall. It appeared to be partitioned into sections. Sure enough, he spotted an employee walk through a section of the giant cloth curtain and disappear behind it. It reminded him of a dozen camping tents welded together. The room itself was large and spacious, about 100 feet across, he estimated. Strange glass barriers stood atop the desks. Equally unusual was the queue. It started at the center of the room and spiraled out to the edges. Below, it lay a parquet floor of white and black, which followed the queue itself, alternating colors as it went. It seemed a dizzying array of elements for such a room, but was likely modeled after larger offices. He was thankful he wasn't on them at this moment. He slid his backpack off of his shoulders and performed a quick check of its contents. Pilbert branded camera, photograph from last night, printed birth certificate, eye scan, fingerprints, and brain signature. It was all here and enough to convict him of a crime on several planets, he joked. He was sent a list of these things to bring immediately after hiring. As soon as he accepted the initial offer, the conversation shifted to what he needed to bring along with the most detailed self-identification form he had ever seen. Regardless, he planted himself in the middle of the queue line behind a large line of people who were, presumably, in the same situation. Some of them donned the Pilbert camera around their neck, others held it in their hands, like a newborn child, and others clutched at their side like a bottle of water. So far, he was impressed with the diversity of personnel he saw within this pantheon. People of all sizes and colors rushed through with the same veracity. He could see the urgency on their faces. He stared at the center of the spiral, the beginning of the queue line, pondering the events over the last few weeks. The interview was more awkward than anticipated, but ended on a decent note. He got along with the interviewing committee and felt he answered the questions in a way that was true to himself and in the best interest of the job. Remy told him to approach the interview as such, and ultimately, it paid off. There were several unique questions that he had continued to indulge, questions that lingered with him even after being hired on. Perhaps they were meant to.
What would you think if work was good enough to be your life? If it is good enough, does work cease to be work? What are your opinions on Considerations by Mark Aurelius?
All unexpected inquiries that he was not used to considering. In a way, it felt sort of humbling, but also alarming in a way he couldn't explain. Slowly but surely, the line diminished in front of him until it was his turn to approach one of the desks behind the glass wall. On closer inspection, the glass wall was perforated by metal grates, which allowed the voices to travel both ways. Another curious feature of the retro approach. He had to admire it. Walking along the room edge to the next available kiosk, he familiarized himself with the face behind the glass. A woman of middle age stood behind it with a perfectly neutral expression on her face. Her eyes beheld a tired watchfulness that could be felt through the barrier between them. Dev got the feeling she was good at her job. Maybe she had worked long enough to become this way, or maybe she was always this way, he thought. As he drew closer, the eyes followed him intensely, still maintaining the emptiness. She wore a peculiar scarf around her neck, made of a thin, translucent fabric.
Hello, how are you today?
She asked promptly.
I'm doing well. And you?
Dev responded as he edged closer to the grate.
It's a nice day.
It's beautiful outside, isn't it?
He remarked as he adjusted his stance.
I'm sorry. These grates are a bit hard to get used to. I apologize.
They're for helping us hear our voices better.
She replied with a mechanical smile.
Yes, I see that.
He paused and began to slide off his backpack.
I have all of the needed identification documents.
Excellent. I was just going to ask if you had them with you.
That's what the backpack is for.
He responded with a light-hearted jab.
Ah, yes. That does make sense now that you've told me.
He fished out the camera first and set it on the divot underneath the glass so that she could access it along with the picture he took with it. She held up her hand innocently.
Just one moment, sir. I need to check the authenticity of this camera. Do you have any receipts from your purchase?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I wasn't aware that I needed them. I can pull them right up for you here on my handheld.
The hand continued to be held up.
No, that won't be necessary. I can't accept them unless they are printed.
The hand went down.
I'll just perform a brief authenticity check before we proceed. Not a problem.
She then rotated the camera around within her hands, again focusing her intense gaze on it. It was almost as if she were holding a weapon to check for its viability. She weighed it briefly, bobbing it up and down methodically, and staring at the bottom, presumably at the logo and product code. She paused in her gaze briefly and suddenly put the camera down.
Okay, the authenticity check is complete and I can verify that this is a Pilbert camera.
I hope so.
He jeered.
I'm happy about it as well.
Another empty smile crossed her cheeks, followed by an awkward pause.
I'll take the picture you took with this camera now.
Dev handed her his picture. It was him in front of a white wall, just as they had requested him to do. She looked intently and nodded her head in approval.
All right, thank you. I'll take the remaining pieces of printed identification in this order: birth certificate, fingerprint, eye scan, and brain scan.
He gazed downward towards his backpack. Quite a strict way of processing, he thought. He never understood why some people insisted on being like this. One by one, he pulled out the items in the correct order, presenting them to her carefully. She placed each one into a desktop scanner of some kind. Apparently, her robotic eyes weren't good enough at authenticating these documents. They each slid through the scanner and exited the other side with a green light lit up.
All right, these have all passed the authentication tests. We'll now move on with the next step of identification procedures.
She motioned to her left.
Please follow me over to the gate, which I'll open for you.
Dev glanced over and noticed for the first time a gate that connected to the queue line. He had missed it in his first evaluation of the room. Like the rest of the line, it was a simple stanchion with a rope across. Did they manually operate such a thing? It seemed so. Unnecessary. He was correct. The employee manually unhooked the rope and latched it back as Dev passed through, truly a bizarre choice for everyone present.
You can follow me right here to the photo booth.
So that's what these were. He followed her as she delicately lifted the blue curtain and gestured for him to come in first. He stepped inside and almost tripped on the metal base of the booth, which was formed by a series of connected girders. It appeared that all of the booths were constructed as one simple unit, sectioned off after the fact. In front of him stood a setup that was at once minimalist and absurd. On one side of the booth, which was about the size of his bathroom, there sat a cheap plastic chair. Opposing the chair was a tripod with a camera on top. As he drew closer, he noticed the camera was the same model. It was almost like it could have been purchased from his same store the night before. It was there to take his picture while he sat in a chair which sat in front of a white screen. He held back a smirk, trying not to look rude as he headed toward the seat. It felt like they were trying to recreate the same environment as they requested from his picture. It was a curious coincidence. What a curious methodology this department followed. He began to lower himself into the seat.
You can... I see. Yes, you can do that. Have a seat.
The woman nervously smiled.
Are we taking the same type of picture as I took last night?
She adjusted the camera and toyed with the controls.
The very same,
She replied as her head rotated to face him.
Feels a bit repetitive for some reason.
He nervously smiled back.
This is all part of verifying your identity.
She replied.
I can see that. It does feel a bit unnecessary.
Yes, I have heard some people say that before. You might understand more as you continue to follow through with the procedures.
They both went silent. He could no longer think of anything to ask this person that wouldn't be met with some sort of non-answer. He had to be happy for her, though. She seemed to fit her job well. She held his picture in her hand and applied her searing gaze to it, and then back at him, back at the picture, back at him.
Could you please move several inches to the right?
He scooted to the right.
All right, now rotate your neck slightly to the left and up. Follow my finger.
It was as if she thought she was his doctor.
Excellent. Almost done. Smile just a bit less.
Nothing could have been harder for him as she finally snapped the photo. This was so unnecessary. He waited a second, then put his face in his hands, trying to cover up his awkward laughter. The picture was printed out of the bottom of the camera and into the employee's hand. She held it up to the light as it developed. She nodded assuredly, issuing a congratulatory mumble to herself. Looking back, she handed him the picture. Dev was quite impressed. Almost enough to distract him from the whole spectacle. It really did look like the exact same picture.
This is you? Please confirm.
I'm sorry?
This is Dev Bakshi pictured here, correct? I need verbal confirmation.
He was stunned.
Yes, of course, it's me.
Thank you so much. I'll have your reality checker here momentarily.
Reality checker?
Further confusion emanated from his voice.
He'll explain it to you soon. Like I said, you'll understand more as the day goes on. Thank you so much for passing the identification procedures. Have a great day.
Thank you for passing?
She had exited the booth with the curtain closing behind her, leaving him by himself. He glanced around anxiously, almost expecting something else to happen immediately, but nothing came. What had just happened? That felt like the most bizarre and stupid procedure that he had ever been a part of. He felt disoriented in a way that he hadn't been before. He had experienced altered states, but this was something else entirely. The entire place was one large entity, the cogs turning so tightly. Still, everything knew its place perfectly, and yet was so superfluous. It was like someone handed him a mere hammer with 1,000 moving parts. Perhaps it would be an interesting concept for...
Hello there, sir.
Boomed a voice from behind the other side of the booth curtain.
Hello?
Thank you for joining us in this edition of Reality Check. Be sure to subscribe and tune in for the next installment. For more Pilbert Co., follow us on Medium, TikTok, and Instagram.